What's up YouTube? Today I'm going to make a video all about 5 beginner photo editing mistakes that you need to avoid when you start doing photography and when you first start editing photos. So when I first started photography 4 or 5, I actually don't know how many years ago it was, 5 or 6 years ago maybe, there were a ton of mistakes that I made in editing. And I look back on my photos that I edited back then and I'm like, ooh, I wish I wouldn't have done it that way, or I wish I would have changed this thing up about it. And so today I'm going to start talking about that, and I'm going to run through 5 things that I wish I would have done, or 5 mistakes I wish I would have avoided when I first started editing photos. Now, the first thing I want to talk about today is actually something that you need to do before you even take any photos at all, and that is shooting raw in camera. So if you're new to photography, you may have seen in the settings of your camera that there are different options for the formats you can shoot your photos in. There's oftentimes a couple different JPEG options, and then there is this option called RAW. When you shoot in RAW, it gives you more of a raw data output from the camera. When you shoot in a JPEG format, for example, it takes the raw data output and then it massively compresses it and it applies like a preset inside of the camera. I personally and a lot of other people don't think that you should use JPEGs, especially when you're intending to edit your photos significantly. I personally believe that you should shoot in RAW because it gives you a ton more flexibility when you're editing photos. So no matter what camera you have, whether it's a Canon camera, a Fuji camera, whatever, there's a 99.9% chance that it is capable of shooting in RAW format. So this is a really, really simple tip. It's something that I made the mistake of not doing for a lot of my first photos, but definitely make sure before you even edit any photos or before you even try putting them on your computer or whatever, make sure you're taking photos in RAW on your camera. Super, super important. So the next tip that I want to talk about is not organizing your images properly in Lightroom. So when I first started taking photos, I didn't really think about the fact that I was going to then be creating thousands and thousands of photos, and then sorting through those in the future was going to be a massive, massive pain if I didn't organize them properly. And so there's no really surefire way of doing this. There's no perfect methodology for organizing your photos, but I think I've created a system that really works for me, and I'm able to go back several years in my Lightroom catalog and figure out exactly what photo I'm trying to find because I organized it in this very specific way. So when I organize my photos, this is how I do it within Lightroom. First thing I do is I create a folder for the year. As you can see on the left-hand side of the screen over here, I have 4 years worth of photos in this catalog. So 2017 or 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. I actually haven't even created one for 2020 just yet. But that's the first thing I do, just so I have them organized by each year. When you open up that folder, you'll see that within each of those folders, I have everything organized by location. So no matter where I'm shooting, I can go back and be like, okay, I know that I went to Utah in 2018, for example. Let me find those photos. So actually, let's open up the 2018 folder to use that as an example. So go into 2018, you can see I have all these different locations. And at the very bottom, you can see Utah. So within that Utah folder, and actually within each of these individual folders, you open it up and you can see that I've now organized within that folder by specific date. So I have the year, and then I have the locations that I've gone to within that year, and then within that location folder, I have specific dates. And then finally, within that folder, I open it up and you can see the individual cameras that I used there. So you can see here that I was shooting with a Fujifilm X-T2 at the time. You click into that, that's the final folder, and here's a picture of my mom in Utah. You can scroll through here, and these are all the pictures that I took on that specific date. So I have found that this is the best way of organizing photos for me. You might want to create a totally different way of organizing things. You might just want to do it chronologically. That might make more sense for you. But me personally, I like doing it by year, and then by location, and then by specific dates that I was at that location. Like specific places like New York City, I go there several times a year. So when I click into that folder, I can see the photos that I took in March, then the ones that I took in July, November, whatever. However many times I go there per year, I can see those individual folders and easily find the images that I took on those specific trips. The next tip that I want to talk about, and the thing that you should definitely avoid, is not having straight horizon lines or not having your images perfectly straight. When I see an image uploaded on Instagram and the horizon line is completely off, the photo is completely crooked, it instantaneously looks super, super amateur. And so this is something that you certainly want to avoid when you're editing your photos. This is actually something that's super easy to fix, super easy to edit in Lightroom, and I'm going to walk you through it right here. So this example right here, it's kind of a bad example because it is pretty much perfectly straight, but I'm going to mess it up intentionally just to show you how I would fix it if it was a crooked photo. I typically try to get my photos as straight as possible in Lightroom, or not in Lightroom, but when I take the photo itself, just so I don't have to crop in on it at all or like fix it afterwards. I try to get it as straight as humanly possible when I take it, but if in the case where you took the photo and it was crooked like this, there's a couple really easy ways to fix it. The first way of doing it is actually just clicking on the cropping tool right on the top right hand corner and then clicking on this auto button right here. You click on auto and it's going to do a pretty dang good job of straightening the photo out, and then in this instance we can fix the crop on it. But if that doesn't work for you perfectly, the auto button, there's a couple other ways that you can fix it. There's also this ruler button right here on the right hand side. You can click on this and then find something that's straight in the image. So for example, the Golden Gate Bridge, this is obviously a perfectly straight vertical pillar. So you drag a line on that just like I did right here, unclick, and it's going to straighten it out perfectly for you right there. And that does the trick. If there's any additional fixing you want to do, you can kind of just twist the photo however you want to make it perfect, line it up, and that's a done deal. That's definitely something that you're going to want to make sure you do with every single photo, because having crooked horizon lines and crooked objects that are supposed to be perfectly straight up and down or perfectly side to side just makes your photo right off the bat look really amateur. The next mistake I want to talk about that I would oftentimes make when I first started editing photos was making my images way too flat, not having enough punch to them, not having enough contrast. The reason that I would do it is because oftentimes there would be a really high contrast scene like this, where the foreground is kind of dark and then the sky is a little bit bright. And so oftentimes what I would do is I would take the shadows and I would crank it up super high, and then I would take the highlights and crank them down super low, because it gives it this kind of unique look where you get all the details of the foreground as well as all the details of the background. And then I might go in and add like some saturation to it, and it gives it this like high dynamic range look that I initially liked when I first started editing photos, but I grew out of it relatively quickly. I think that this is okay and it looks decent, but I personally think that this HDR look or high dynamic range look is kind of amateur looking, and I don't recommend doing it because it does look amateur and it doesn't really allow for a ton of creativity. I personally recommend not creating a super flat image. Maybe do something like this where you lift the shadows a tiny bit, add some contrast into the image, and then maybe a tiny bit of saturation, and it's going to give your photo a little bit more punch rather than just making it super flat and just super saturated. So the last mistake I want to touch on is just not adding too much of anything to your photos. So when I first started editing photos, I had a tendency to experiment with cranking things like the dehaze all the way to 100, and then taking things like the saturation and cranking it all the way to 100. And while this might give your photo kind of an interesting effect, it's really easy to tell when someone's a little bit more of an amateur when they're cranking things like the clarity and the dehaze and things like that all the way to 100. It doesn't really give your photos a timeless look that oftentimes more professional photographers and professional editors are going to be going for. What I would recommend is definitely experiment with these tools, but don't go crazy with them. If you want to add a little bit of saturation to the photo, then great. If you want to add a little bit of dehaze to the photo, awesome. But don't crank them to 100 thinking that that effect or that look is making your photo look awesome, because it almost never is. There are some instances that will warrant you cranking things all the way to 100, but it's very, very rare. I would say play with all of these tools, experiment with them, and use them in moderation, just like with anything. Don't go crazy with any of them, because it's very, very easy to tell when a photo is amateur, when the saturation, dehaze, clarity, and things of that nature are all cranked to 100. So I know that today was a fairly basic tutorial. I went through some very basic stuff that those of you who out there are a little bit more experienced might not have learned anything crazy new today, but this was definitely targeting like very beginner photo editors. I'm going to start making more tutorials moving into the future on how I edit my photos using things like the tone curve here on the right hand side, things like the HSL sliders, and even split toning and things of that nature. There are so many capabilities here in Lightroom that I certainly think that I can help you guys learn about more. And for example, how I took this photo right here, a pretty flat, boring image, and turned it into this right here. This example I've actually made a video about already, so I'll link it up here in the top right hand or left hand corner, whichever one it is, if you want to check that out. It was one of the first videos that I ever made on this channel, so if you're interested in checking that out, definitely go and do it. But I'm going to start making more tutorials in the future about how I did things like this. So as you can see on the right hand side, there were some significant adjustments made here, up here in the exposure adjustments, also in the tone curve, and then all the way going down to the HSL sliders and just about every tool that exists in Lightroom. I want to do a little bit more Lightroom tutorials and things of that nature because it's super interesting, and I certainly think I have some tips that could help you guys make cooler photos as well. Anyways, guys, thank you as always for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, definitely give it a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, definitely subscribe. I have a ton more content coming here in the near future. Right now it's winter time here in upstate New York, and so I definitely plan on doing like more camping videos and things of that nature, but because it's been so damn cold, I haven't been able to go outside a ton just because making videos and making photos is extremely challenging in the winter time, and also my job has been ramping up significantly, so I've been struggling to get out. But I'm definitely going to continue making videos like this, at least for the time being, and if you want to see more of this, definitely hit that subscribe button below. Again, thank you a ton for watching, and I'll plan on seeing you all in the next video. Peace.